So what are the things that accelerate aging? We talked this morning about just living longer with the entropy going on. We've talked about telomere shortening. We've talked about oxidative stress. No, we're going to talk about oxidative stress right now. Let's talk about oxidative stress. So what is oxidative stress? This is the damage that happens to the body's tissues, the DNA, the proteins, the lipids, with molecules that have oxygen that can interact with them, oxidizing them. That's why you hear so much about antioxidants to stop the oxidation process. If you leave metal out in the open, it will rust. That rust is oxygen from the atmosphere oxidizing the metal. You cut a piece of fruit and leave it on the counter, it will brown. The browning is oxygen from the environment damaging the fruit. And so this is examples of oxidation. And oxidation can happen in the body. Now, what is it that increases oxidative stress on the body? One factor is obesity. Adipose tissue produces reactive oxygen species, or molecules that can cause oxidation, and interferes with the body's antioxidant enzymes. An obese person at age 70 will have a brain with 8% less brain volume and appear 16 years older than a normal weight person at age 70. A normal weight person at age 70 will have 4% less brain volume, and their brain will appear 8 years older than an overweight person than a normal weight person will. So, obesity is a factor. We're going to come back and I think visit that a little more. Other factors: tobacco, illegal drugs, heavy alcohol use. They suppress the body's antioxidant enzymes. They produce reactive oxygen species, turn on the stress circuitry of the brain, increasing oxidative stress on the brain. On the left are normal lung fibroblasts. You can see they're orderly and nicely uniform. On the right, those are fibroblasts exposed to cigarette smoke, which are quite damaging. This is a woman on the left, and then 4 years later, the same woman with 4 years of methamphetamine use. And you can go to the government website, and they have tons of these types of pictures that you can see. And methamphetamine and these types of illegal drugs are highly oxidizing. Does she look like she's only aged 4 years? No, significant acceleration of the aging process. And then chronic stress, which activates the fear circuitry, kicking up the immune system, kicking on the inflammatory factors we talked about earlier. So abuse environments, violence environments, chronic fear belief systems that keep people in fear and anxiety. So oxidative stress is a factor accelerating the aging process. Anything that kicks up that chronic stress reaction will accelerate the aging process, increase your risk for dementia. And then glycation. What is glycation? Glycation is when a glucose molecule binds with another molecule in your body that it's not supposed to bind to. And that forms a new molecule called an advanced glycation end product. And that new molecule is oxidizing or inflammatory to the body and causes body tissue damage. An example is hemoglobin A1C. Has anybody heard of hemoglobin A1C? So hemoglobin A1C, you can see on the left, you've got the hemoglobin molecule and a glucose molecule. Hemoglobin normally is in your blood, carries oxygen. Glucose is normally used by your body for energy. But when they bind together, they form this new molecule called hemoglobin A1C. Glucose can't be used for energy. Hemoglobin can't carry oxygen anymore. And this new molecule damages end organs. This is a blood test they will do on diabetics. They will measure the hemoglobin A1C, because the higher the blood sugars, then the more hemoglobin A1C that is formed, the more poorly their diabetes is being controlled. And this is one of the reasons why diabetics get end organ damage, peripheral neuropathies, retinopathies, renal failure, heart problems, because they have a much higher oxidizing load with these molecules being formed because of the high glucose. Now, they can also, these advanced glycation end products, one form is the hemoglobin A1C, hemoglobin and glucose. But glucose can bind to collagen directly and form glycated collagen. And when you form glycated collagen, then it can't give the skin its normal elasticity. The skin will thin and wrinkle, and this is glycated collagen. It can, glucose can bind to LDL cholesterol, and then it can deposit in the arterial walls, the lining of your arteries, closing the lumen so you have narrower and narrower arteries. And the glycated cholesterol is more resistant to being removed by your good cholesterol. This is a picture of what that would look like, kind of graphically depicting that. But this is actually an artery, and you can see the lumen should be this wide open. But all of this is glycated cholesterol that's deposited, and you can see now the blood flow is going to be significantly reduced because the lumen's so much smaller. What are the sources? Food sources. Brown foods, fried foods, charred foods. The high temperature searing cooking method. When you cook foods this way, those high temperatures form advanced glycation end products. And then when you eat the food, whatever the dose is, however much is in that, your body will absorb 30% of that into your body. And then your own body will make these advanced glycation end products if you have high blood sugars. So your own body will make them, and your own body will make them anyway, but if your blood sugars are low, then you form low amounts of them and it's not significant. It's high blood sugars, you form high amounts, and then it becomes problematic. That's why diabetics have all those end organ problems we mentioned. So here's advanced glycation end products. Advanced glycation end products. Advanced glycation end products. Advanced glycation end products. This is the browning, high temperature cooking method is the problem, not the onions, not the potatoes. Even if you eat the meat, if you were to crock pot cook it, you wouldn't have the advanced glycation end products. It's the high temperature searing, frying, cooking method that is forming them. Okay? So with that in mind, I want to talk to you now, what's pathological aging, this dementia. First, let's talk about what dementia is. Dementia is a functional diagnosis. It's a loss of function. And in order to have dementia, you have memory impairment plus the loss of one of four domains. Aphasia, where you have normal language ability is impaired. So memory impairment with language impairment is dementia. Or apraxia, you can't button your shirt normally or tie your shoes. Your motor abilities are impaired. Memory impairment plus motor impairment, dementia. Or agnosia, you can't recognize things for there. You can't recognize a chair when you see one. You've lost the ability to recognize normal stuff with memory impairment. That's dementia. Or executive function, inability to balance your checkbook, follow a recipe, organize your house. If you have memory impairment with one or more of those domain losses, that's the functional syndrome known as dementia. Anything that damages the brain can cause dementia. Parkinson's disease causes Parkinson's dementia. Vascular disease, little tiny strokes, causes vascular dementia. Alzheimer's disease causes Alzheimer's dementia, okay? So this is important, and then Lewy body disease causes Lewy body dementia, and so forth. There's a lot of different dementias out there. The most common is the Alzheimer's, the late onset Alzheimer's type of dementia. That's the most common. I don't think I have the stats on here, but 1,000 people over the age 65, 9 will have Parkinson's dementia, Parkinson's disease. 63 will have Alzheimer's dementia. So it's significantly higher, about 6 times more prevalent as Alzheimer's than Parkinson's. This is a normal brain. This is an Alzheimer's brain. Color is irrelevant, so ignore the color. What you're looking at are the mountains and the valleys. The mountains are called gyri, and the valleys are called sulci. And if you look on the healthy brain, you'll see how meaty the mountains are and how thin the valleys are, how narrow and tight. If you look at the Alzheimer's brain, you'll see how wide those valleys are and how thin the mountains are. Well, the brain exists in a closed space, the skull. And the only way then you can get more space in between the mountains is for them to shrink. In the mountains, the gyri are where your neurons are. And so the Alzheimer's brain has lost billions of neurons. By the time somebody has the diagnosis of Alzheimer's dementia, the brain has already lost billions of neurons. This is very important. This is why there's never going to be a medicine that's going to reverse Alzheimer's dementia. Don't fall in the fantasy of thinking Alzheimer's disease is like pneumonia. Give a pill and you can get the infection to go away and you can restore health. It'll never happen because you can't regrow all the billions of neurons with all the pathways and all the multiple up to 10,000 connections with other neurons that have been lost. You just can't regrow all that stuff. Okay, so once they've got the diagnosis, the real money for this disorder I'm going to show you is in preventing the loss in the first place. That's where the money is. And medicines aren't going to prevent that either. This is all lifestyle related. This is Alzheimer's brain on the left, non-Alzheimer's brain on the right. This is a cross-section. You'll notice the large holes in the center. Those are your ventricles. They're over here too, but see how small the ventricles are here, how large they are here. Ventricles are where the cerebral spinal fluid circulates through your brain. The only way these get larger is for the tissue to shrivel up and shrink away. Again, this brain has lost billions of neurons. We're going to look now on a graphic. This would be a healthy neuron. The bottom one would be a diseased neuron. This is an axon, and you see that little tiny square? We're going to zoom in and blow that up, and that's what, in these squares over here, we have blown up this little tiny section of the axons, and this would be inside a healthy axon. This is inside a diseased axon. And then right here, this is a microtubule. We're going to even blow that up a little bit more so we can just zoom in a little bit more on that microtubule. And we're going to talk about this. The microtubules inside your axons are kind of like highways. It's in the nucleus of your neurons where the machinery is that makes your various neurotransmitters and proteins and various substances your neurons need. And the microtubules are the highways that will distribute that down to the axon terminals and so forth. Microtubules also give structure and stability to the neuron and the axons. You will notice this spider web looking like stuff, stringy stuff on the outside here. Okay? That stuff is called tau protein. And you should conceptualize tau protein in the same way you would conceptualize pins in scaffolding. Everybody know what scaffolding is? And when you put pieces of scaffolding together, they'll put a pin in the corner of the two pieces, or the two joints. Everybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, what would happen if we built a scaffold and then we started pulling the pins out? What would happen to the scaffold? It would collapse. Okay, if anything starts destabilizing the tau proteins, which you see happening here, the microtubules begin to collapse. Okay, and I will tell you, if you add a phosphate group, and that's what this is saying here, hyperphosphorylated, if a phosphate group attaches to a tau protein, it's like pulling the pin on your scaffolding. That tau protein disconnects. And when you do that, then the microtubules begin to collapse. Everybody got the concept with me? Because this is integral in what's going wrong with Alzheimer's disease. Now, there is a gene that codes for a pump, the ApoE gene. This ApoE codes for a transporter. It's in the neurons, and it transports fatty substances in and out of the neurons, like cholesterol and fatty vitamins like vitamin E and vitamin A. These pumps will pump this stuff in and out of the neurons. There are 3 gene variants in the human genome. There's the ApoE2, 3, and 4 variant. If you have the E2 version, which 7% of the population does, it increases your risk of hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis, and strokes and heart attacks. If you have the E3 version, 79% of the population, then you have no health-related consequences. This is the healthy version. And remember, you have 2 copies of this gene, one from mom, from dad, so it's possible to have a various combination, but you'll have 2 copies. The best is to have 2 E3 versions. That's the best to have. If you have the E4 version, 14% of the population have this version, and it's implicated in Alzheimer's disease. If you have 2 copies of the E4, it increases your risk of Alzheimer's dementia up to 30 times. 65% of people with Alzheimer's dementia have this gene, but 1/3 of people with Alzheimer's dementia do not have this gene. This is confusing, isn't it? Because if you got a gene, you want causal. Gene, cause. No gene, no risk. Isn't that what you want? That's not life. The way you should conceptualize this is the ApoE4 gene will make you more sensitive to the very same variables that cause Alzheimer's dementia in people without the gene. But if you have this bad gene, you need less of a dose of those variables to get the dementia. Whereas if you don't have the gene, the same stuff will cause Alzheimer's dementia, and you can still get it, like 1/3 do, but you need more of the dose to get it. Does that make sense now? And the dose are the things we've already been talking about. And we will come back and hopefully put all the pieces together for you. But talking about modifiable lifestyle factors, ApoE4 gene is neither necessary nor sufficient in its own to cause Alzheimer's dementia, just to make you more sensitive to those variables. Study at the University of Washington found that people with this ApoE4 gene were not demented and had less of this protein amyloid we're going to talk about in a second, which is associated with Alzheimer's disease, had less of it in their brain, even if they had the gene, if they had a history of exercise. One modifiable life factor, regular exercise, eliminated the risk of this gene. And you're going to understand why it did in a moment. Genetics account for about 1/3 of the risk. The key is inflammation. Do you remember talking about inflammation earlier in our first talk? Chronic worry, talking that ruminating loop, activating your immune system, kicking up those inflammatory factors, the inflammatory cytokines and so forth. That inflammation is going to be the key, which is going to cause insulin resistance in our brain. Let's talk about amyloid real quick. Your brain is designed by God to be able to change based on life experiences. If you decide at any age in your life, right now you say, I'm going to take music lessons. I'm going to take language lessons. I'm going to take any lessons. You're going to learn something new. Let's say you decide to take a foreign language course, and you really start studying it. Maybe you move to that country and immerse yourself in it. As you begin to learn this language, your brain will begin making new networks. As you direct energy into the pathways of learning and speaking the language, your brain will sprout new connections. And if you keep practicing the language, those new connections will become more complex, and more neurons will be recruited to spend more energy to sprout new connections. And if you keep speaking it, not only will your vocabulary, total word knowledge increase, your enunciation, the way you're able to pronounce the words will improve. Your ability to put them together in sentences will improve. Your ability to understand what's being said to you will improve. So your entire network will expand for this ability. Music, the same way. Golf lessons. Whatever it is you decide, your brain is able to adapt and change based on the choices you make. And let's say you've done that, and you've lived in country for a few years. You've gotten fairly fluent in this language, and then you move back to the States, and 20 years go by, and you haven't spoken that language. What happens to your proficiency? See, this is a law of exertion. If you don't use it, so your brain will begin, you're not using this, your brain begins pruning back the network. And as it prunes back the network and neurons die, your brain directed, this is not pathology, this is normal. This is how you're able to unlearn a habit. I heard we had a sexual addiction talk earlier. If people want to actually be free of these things, they have to stop engaging them in real life and stop engaging in imagination. And over the course of time, the brain will prune these circuits back. Aren't you glad you can break habits? And the brain can change. This is a good thing. But when a neuron dies, it leaves behind trace chemicals, iron, copper, zinc. These are actually toxic to neurons if they're just floating around in the cerebral spinal fluid. So the brain has mechanisms to get rid of this, and it's a protein called amyloid. The brain will release amyloid, which will scavenge up the free-floating ions and bind to them, and then they will be pumped out of the brain. The amyloid attached to the ions will be pumped out of the brain to keep these things from damaging neurons. ApoE, the transporter we just talked about, is the transporter that pumps the amyloid out of the brain. The ApoE4 variant is less efficient at pumping this out of the brain. It's less efficient. Thus, they're more vulnerable in certain circumstances, which I'll get to in a moment, for having the amyloid build up in the brain. Let's talk about insulin. In the periphery, insulin regulates glucose metabolism. It's produced in the islet cells of the pancreas. Type 2 adult onset diabetics don't have too little insulin. They don't have a problem with their islet cells producing insulin. They have plenty of insulin. In fact, they have more insulin than a non-diabetic. What they have, though, is they have insulin resistance. Their insulin receptors are not responding, so the body is pumping out more insulin. Okay? Did you know in the brain makes its own insulin? And in the brain, insulin regulates amyloid clearance. It regulates the clearance. Amyloid is scavenging up these ions. We need to pump it out through ApoE4, but that's regulated by insulin. What do you think might happen if we become insulin resistant? Also, it regulates tau phosphorylation. Remember tau? Pins are the pins in our scaffolding, in our microtubules. If we attach phosphate groups, we disconnect them and things start collapsing. Insulin regulates that. It regulates blood flow in the brain, inhibits cell death. Apoptosis is cell death. Insulin protects cells and inhibits cell death. It facilitates neurotransmitter receptor trafficking, synaptic plasticity, ability to make those new connections, and memory formation. Did you know insulin was doing all this in your brain? Now, if I don't show you any slide but this one slide, just one slide, and I say to you, well, what do you think would be the symptoms of a person if they develop insulin resistance in their brain? Can you see problems here? And I'm going to tell you that's really the problem in Alzheimer's dementia, is you're getting insulin resistance in the brain. Similarities between diabetes, adult onset type 2 diabetes, and Alzheimer's disease, both have insulin resistance, not too little insulin resistance. They have elevated inflammatory factors with the oxidative stress, which are causing the insulin receptors to not respond. Amyloid then is not being cleared out of the brain and builds up in the brain of the Alzheimer's patient and builds up in the pancreas of the diabetic patient. Tau now becomes hyperphosphorylated. We get cognitive decline. If you have type 2 diabetes, it increases your risk of Alzheimer's dementia 60%. Because the same underlying mechanism is driving both insulin resistance in the body, insulin resistance in the brain. 50% of Americans between 45 and 64 have peripheral insulin resistance with normal blood sugars. Check their blood sugar level, normal. But they have a higher insulin load to keep it normal because the receptors are becoming resistant. That will actually cause them to get more obesity, because insulin sends a signal to your fat cells to not break down, and for the bot tells the liver to make more fat. And so you get into a reinforcing downward loop. 76% of people over 65 have peripheral insulin resistance. 3 out of 4 over 65. Triggers of insulin resistance are that should be corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup is what that should be. High fructose corn syrup, not fruit. Okay, high fructose corn syrup diet, high fat diet, chronic stress, inflammation. So what's happening? Beta amyloid, these various inflammatory factors phosphorylate the insulin subreceptor in our brain. It becomes unresponsive. We can't clear this out of the brain. So here's how it goes. You get inflammation going, chronic worried stress, eating a very unhealthy diet. By the way, this is the same pathology that's driving major depression. The chronic inflammatory cascade working in the brain like this. And people who eat a fast food, junk food diet have a 40% higher rate of depression than people who don't. Because fast food, junk food directly causes inflammation in your body. So anything that causes inflammation increases your risk of depression. Anything that causes inflammation increases your risk of dementia. So inflammation, you get insulin resistance in the subreceptor in the brain that clears amyloid, that ApoE pump. Amyloid is not cleared. We're not pumping it out now because we're insulin resistant. So the pump is not pumping. Amyloid causes tau to be phosphorylated. If we do that, we're pulling the pins on our microtubules now. Microtubules begin to collapse. When microtubules collapse, ions flood inside the cell, and the cell begins to die. The cell dies, and guess what's left behind when a cell dies? Trace chemicals, copper, zinc, iron. And what does the brain do when those are floating around? It releases more amyloid to scavenge it up. So it releases more amyloid to scavenge it up, but we're insulin resistant, so that amyloid is not being cleared, so that will phosphorylate more tau, which will cause more microtubules to disconnect, which will cause more ions and the neuron dies, and we have more copper, zinc, and we get more amyloid. Do you see the problem here? This is what's happening. And what is the real driver? It's insulin resistance in the subreceptors in the brain, so we can't clear this out of the brain because of the chronic inflammatory cascades. Another possibility is you have bad genes, like the 2 ApoE genes, and you get a head injury, and the head injury causes a sudden, like a concussion. And when you get a concussion, you bruise the brain, and you lose a bunch of neurons from the bruise very quickly, and they leave behind the trace chemicals, and there's a flood of amyloid to try and clear it up, but you are now moderately insulin resistant. You were keeping up, you weren't falling behind, but you got the ApoE4 genes, and that concussion then you can't clear, and it overloads the system, and you start the whole thing going this way. This is why you get the TBI type, and if you have a history of TBI, you have a higher risk of dementia later for these same reasons. So anything that increases inflammation increases the risk of dementia. We talked about obesity earlier. I was going to come back and revisit this because obesity is complex. It's not as simple as calories in, calories out. Sleep deprivation, if you don't get normal sleep, it alters your body's leptin levels and ghrelin levels, which regulate body metabolism and energy use, and so people with sleep disorders have higher rates of obesity than people with normal sleep patterns. 50 to 70 million Americans have some type of sleep disorder, and 35% of Americans sleep less than 7 hours a night, according to the CDC. It's like 1 in 3. What about soybeans and obesity? Well, historically, the American diet had 1% of a fatty acid called linoleic acid. Linoleic acid, over the last 100 years, has been increasing in our diet, so now we're eating about 8% of our diet is linoleic acid. And soybeans are 50% by weight linoleic acid. Linoleic acid is a precursor to two marijuana-like endocannabinoids that stimulate the body's, the hypothalamus, to not feel full. In other words, it interferes with satiety. You want to eat more, is what the problem is. And these increase appetite, reduce satiety, and therefore contribute to obesity. Animals-fed diets composed of 35% fat and 8% linoleic acid were significantly more obese than animals with a 60% fat diet and only 1% linoleic acid. When they added omega-3 fatty acids in from fish, it eliminated the endocannabinoids and the weight normalized. So the omega-3 from fish oils prevented the endocannabinoids from doing this from linoleic acid. They monitored insulin levels in both groups, and this was not simply from a high-carb diet in the one group driving it. What about gut bacteria? Obese people have less of a bacteria called bacteroides and more firmicutes than lean people. It's an interesting study. They took these genetically identical cloned mice and that had sterile bowels, meaning they had no bacteria in their bowels. They put them into two groups, and they colonized the bowels of the one group of cloned animals with the bacteria from thin people, and they colonized the bowels of the other group with the bacteria from obese people, and then they gave them the same diets, exact same caloric intake, and all of the ones that were colonized from the obese people became obese, and none of the ones from the thin people became obese, and they're genetically identical animals. So the gut bacteria has a big factor in your body's ability to absorb energy, number one, and to burn energy. Diets that result in weight loss also increase the bacteroides and decrease the firmicutes. Food choices change your gut bacteria in as little as 24 hours. So you change your diet, within 24 hours your gut bacteria is changing. Plant-based diets, guess what? Raise the good bacteria, and animal-based diets raise the bad bacteria. I want to mention something else. Well, the mechanism is it works. One of the mechanisms in the book, I describe this in detail, is that the healthy bacteria will activate an immune cell in your gut wall that will cause a cascade like dominoes falling once that immune cell activates, which will turn white fat in your body into brown fat. White fat is storing energy. Brown fat is high in mitochondria. Mitochondria are organelles that burn energy, and thus the bacteria in the gut send a signal to the immune system, and it turns the stored fat into fat that is burned when you regulate your body temperature and so forth. This fat gets burned, and this is the fat that you burn off when you lose weight. And so one of the mechanisms of the change in the gut bacteria is the cascade of shifting your white fat to brown fat. Additionally, when they look at the gut bacteria after bypass surgery, when they do the gastric bypass surgery to weight loss, they have a shift in gut bacteria after the surgery in the same way that the diet does for the gut bacteria. So there's a real relationship there. Obesity not only causes inflammation, but inflammation causes insulin resistance, which I already said drives more obesity. 4 keys to preventing Alzheimer's dementia. Number 1 is physical conditioning. Exercise. When you exercise regularly, your muscles produce something called interleukin 10. This is a very powerful anti-inflammatory cytokine. which will suppress or push down the inflammatory cytokines that were coming from worry, anxiety, and stress that we were talking about earlier. And as it pushes down the inflammatory cytokines, it removes them, thus it restores insulin sensitivity. This is why people who exercise have better glucose control, because their insulin receptors become resensitized because they're removing the inflammatory factors causing the insulin resistance. So also, the studies show that people have chronic conditions like fibromyalgia with aches and pains all over their body. The one intervention that consistently shows the most robust and most profound pain relief is regular exercise, if you can get them to do it, because you're reducing the inflammatory factors that are causing so much of the aches and pains. Additionally, regular exercise turns on all the brain's neurotrophins. Neurotrophins are proteins that cause your brain to sprout new neurons and keep your neurons healthy, and there's a whole slew of them. Some medicines turn on one of them, but exercise turns them all on. So regular exercise is good. It also enhances capillary formation. You get better blood flow, which clears toxins and things out of the brain, better oxygenation, and so forth. Active animals have larger hippocampi. Hippocampi is the part of the brain where all new learning takes place. If you're trying to remember something from my lectures, today they're right now going into your hippocampi. That's where they're going, okay? That's where new learning takes place. Older people who walk regularly, even as little as 15 minutes a day, have lower risk of Alzheimer's dementia than those who don't. People who routinely exercise exhibit better cognitive abilities than those who don't. In one study of older adults who started walking regularly, got up to, I think, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, they could see 2% growth in the hippocampi, which reversed 2 years of aging. Their brain looked 2 years younger just from walking regularly. Okay, so again, very healthy to get some exercise. One of the keys to staying young is regular physical exercise. Second one is mental exercise, new learning, what you guys are doing at this seminar, trying to learn new material. That actually turns on genes that keep the brain young. We talked about one of them earlier today. And it is new learning. It's not repetitive stuff like crossword puzzles are repetitive. That's not learning new material. So it's really thinking, learning, assimilating something you don't already know. Stress management. Chronic stress activates the inflammatory cascades. We talked about that in our first lecture. Damages the brain. Study of 5,000 individuals found that neuroticism, which is chronic worry, guilt, feelings of anxiety, depression, was associated with greater risk of dementia, but conscientiousness was protective. See, conscientiousness is not obsessive compulsive disorder. Conscientiousness is a person who has a healthy conscience and is sensitive to doing things that are injurious and harmful. And so they avoid it. They just don't look at porn. They just don't do things that are knowingly harmful to them. They're conscientious about the way they live their life, and that's actually protective from dementia. Sleep. Let's talk about sleep. First off, obstructive sleep apnea is when you're asleep, the soft tissues, muscles relax, soft tissues cover the windpipe, your diaphragm tries to pull air, but the windpipe is covered, so you're not pulling air, so your oxygen levels fall. As they fall, the brainstem is alerted that you're suffocating. You wake up enough to tighten up the musculature, you grab a breath, the oxygen level shoots up, and your brainstem relaxes, and you're in and out of stage 1 sleep all night. And this is not good. People who have untreated sleep apnea have less gray matter and more depression. The good news is when you treat the sleep apnea, this reverses. The brain volume increases again and the mood disorder clears. So it's very treatable. People that are chronically fatigued, have chronic headaches, have concentration problems, have mood problems. If you're also obese, this is a risk factor for it. You should actually go and get a sleep study. And if you need to get treated, get treated. You'll feel so much better, and your brain will work better, and you'll be more alert, and you'll have a sharper mind if you get it treated. Sleep disorders double the risk of depression, and if you have higher depression, you have higher rates of dementia. Your brain is 2 to 3% of your body weight, but it uses 20% of your body's energy. 2 to 3% of your body weight, 20% of your body's energy. It's highly metabolic, meaning there's lots of waste products from burning all this energy. It is during sleep that your brain cells actually contract and expel out from the inside of the brain cell into the cerebrospinal fluid those byproducts of metabolism to be cleared out of your brain. If you are chronically sleep deprived, you are not giving your brain the time to clear the byproducts of metabolism. It's also one of the reasons why children need significantly more sleep, because their brains are going under a tremendous amount of remodeling, and they have many more waste products that need to be cleared out of their brain, and why adults need less than kids, because our brains are not being remodeled as much, but we still do need sleep to clear these waste products. People who are chronically sleep deprived have greater dementia than people who are not sleep deprived. Let me tell you something else about sleep. Many people don't know what normal sleep is. Many people think that normal sleep is you lay down at 10 o'clock, you fall asleep, you sleep for 7 to 8 hours, and you wake up 7 to 8 hours later. This is not normal sleep. There is not one human being on earth who sleeps like this. Here's what normal sleep is. Normal sleep is when you first fall asleep. This is like on Thanksgiving afternoon. This is late stage 1 sleep, and grandma starts to snore on the couch. You go, Grandma, you're snoring. Oh, I wasn't even asleep yet. Okay? This is this very light sleep. You're not even sure you're sleeping yet. Okay? This is followed by stage 2. This is then followed by this deep, slow wave sleep. Your heart rate falls, your body temperature falls, and this is followed by REM, rapid eye movement sleep, where you do your dreaming, and then you wake up. Stage 1, 2, deep sleep, REM, wake up. Stage 1, 2, deep sleep, REM, wake up, all night long. From the time you enter stage 1 to the time you wake up at the end of REM is anywhere between 70 and 120 minutes. A little over an hour to 2 hours through the night. Now, when we're young or very physically exhausted, those wake-ups are just a few seconds. We wake up just enough to shift, turn right back into stage 1, and we have amnesia for the wake-up. We think we didn't wake up, but on an EEG, you were awake for a brief period. When we get older, wake up, bladder! Okay? And off to the bathroom we go, and now we come back and we remember that we woke up and we start thinking, I'm not sleeping good anymore. I've got a sleep problem. And people start worrying about, and they'll start going, oh, I hope I can sleep tonight. I woke up 3 times last night. I know. And this anxiety now gears up their amygdala, which kicks up their norepinephrine and their adrenaline, and they're more stressed, and now they're having trouble falling asleep in addition to staying asleep. And so what are they going to do? They're going to go take some medicine to try and medicate their sleep, and they start medicating normal sleep. And most of the medications used for sleep cause memory problems and increase your risk of dementia. The over-the-counter medicines, like all the PM medicines basically on the market, have Benadryl in them. Diphenhydramine, which is an anticholinergic. If you use it chronically, use it once in a while on a trip, something, no big deal. Use it chronically, it increases your risk of dementia. It interferes with acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is deficient in Alzheimer's dementia. Use the prescription ones from doctors, the vast majority of those, Ambiens, Lunestas, Klonopins, Xanaxes, these types of medicines, the benzodiazepine family, 7 of 9 studies show they increase your risk of dementia. They actually chemically interfere with memory consolidation. On the very night you take them, I can tell you, I have many patients that if you take those medicines, they will chemically interfere with memory transfer that night. So if you're trying to learn something here today, it's going in your hippocampus. During sleep tonight, it transfers out of your hippocampus into other brain regions for long-term storage. If you're not getting normal sleep, you're a college student, you pull an all-nighter, you've just cheated yourself from retaining the stuff you've studied. Okay? If you take many of these sleep agents, then you actually chemically prevent the long-term storage, and you've just lost a bunch of stuff you've studied. And additionally, you will actually, over the course of time, accelerate dementia. So melatonin is fine. Somebody's going to ask, you don't have to write on the question, melatonin is fine. Not going to have any problems using melatonin. And there are a couple medicines that docs can use that don't have the anticholinergic effects, but they're prescription meds, and they're okay to use as well. So then what about Sabbath rest? Again, reducing risk of dementia. How many have heard of the blue zones? If you haven't heard of the blue zones, interesting. This was Dan Butner. He searched the world to find the 5 zones in the world that have the highest concentration of people living to be over 100. And these are the 5 zones he found in the world. Icara, Greece, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, and Loma Linda, California. Now, what's interesting about Loma Linda, California, the first 4 are homogeneous. They are people with a very common gene pool and a common cultural background. But Loma Linda is heterogeneous. They have people from all over the world, all different cultures, living there. But you know what's unique about them? High concentration of Seventh-day Adventists. Okay, and from the Blue Zone website, this is not from the Adventist website, this is the Blue Zone website. It says, the lessons from Loma Linda, and this is what he tried to do, is identify those practices and principles in all these cultures that promote long life. And from Loma Linda, find a sanctuary and time to decompress. Observance from Sabbath strictly occurs from Friday to Saturday night, giving Adventists a weekly time to focus on family, friends, God, and nature. I will tell you, I work in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm in the Bible Belt. The vast majority of my patients go to church every week, but they do not take Sabbath rest. They will go Sunday morning, go to Sunday school, or many of them don't even do that. They'll just go to the sermon. And as soon as it's over, it's right back to the grind. They got laundry, they got the yard to do, they've got to go grocery shopping, they've got this problem to do, that problem to do. Okay? They never give rest for their mind. See, sleep is rest for your body. Sabbath is rest for your mind. Time to decompress, to put the cares of the world aside. Every week to go on vacation. It's a vacation in time. You're off. And I don't know if maybe you can get your mind around it this way. When you do take a vacation from home and you leave your house and you go, say, to Florida or to the mountains or wherever you go, and you leave your house behind and the job behind, do you have a psychological decompression you experience? That's what the Sabbath is supposed to be every week. It's supposed to be a time to every 7 days you go, I'm off. And the reason that it's beautiful about the Sabbath is because if you're an actual functioning human being, you never run out of work to do in life. There's always more to do. You never come to the point and say, oh, everything's done. There's nothing more in my house that needs to be cleaned or whatever. There's always more to do, right? Okay? And so people who are conscientious people who don't understand Sabbath rest is a gift from God, not a rule you're obliged to. It's a gift. It's a gift to you. Okay? If you don't understand it, what happens is they are conscientious and they go, but I still have more to do. I still have more to do. And this is a trap of the devil. You can't have health outside of God's design, and God has designed us to rest 1 day in 7, to decompress. And the data shows very strongly that those who do have lower inflammatory cascades, better physical health, they live longer than those who don't. So I encourage you, take a day off and without guilt. Yeah, I've got more work to do. That's okay. This is my day to decompress with the Lord and my family and get out into nature and do something that's rejuvenating for you. Seventh-day Adventists, let's be fair though. They also eat healthier. They're more likely to be vegetarian, don't smoke, use alcohol or illegal drugs, exercise more than most, and have less obesity. So it's not only the Sabbath, but the Blue Zone website really felt that that was an important element in longevity. And then nutrition, maintaining normal weight we talked about. The two diets that have consistently shown better brain volume as we age and better cognition and memory as we age are the Mediterranean diet, which is high in olive oil and omega-3 fatty acid fish oil. Those diets, or the whole food vegan diet, fruits, nuts, grains, vegetable diet. The diet's consistently shown worse brain volume and worse risk of Alzheimer's dementia is the American diet. Fast food, junk food, meat, potato type diet. That diet is the one that is consistently associated with the bad outcomes. Now let's look at some specific nutrients, food sources, supplements and things we can take. Vitamin D and dementia, study of over 1,600 adults looking at no dementia at the outset, and then checking vitamin D levels and then following them up 5.5 years later, found there were 171 new cases of dementia over the next 5 years. 102 of those were Alzheimer's type. You can see again, Alzheimer's type was much more common than all the others combined. What was the increased risk of dementia? If you had a vitamin D level less than 25, I will tell you, less than 25, and this is just a measure, nanomoles per liter, it's what comes back from when they do a blood level. If it's less than 25, it increases all causes of mortality. All causes of death go up if it's that low. But it significantly more than doubled your risk of dementias, all the dementias, including Alzheimer's type. If it's over 25 but less than 50, and I will tell you, most labs will tell you the normal level of a vitamin D is 30. So if you have a 31, you're going to have a normal level according to the labs. But the data shows if it's less than 50, you still have more than 1.5 times the risk of developing Alzheimer's dementia than if it's between 50 and 100. If it's over, and you don't want to say, well, okay, I'll just jack up on vitamin D. I'll just start taking supplements. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. It can build up in your system, and you can become toxic. And levels over levels over 140 increase all cause of death, all cause mortality increase. You don't want to just start jacking up on a bunch of vitamin D. You need to get your doctor to check your level. Now, I live in Tennessee. It's a sunny southern state. 70% of the people in Chattanooga are vitamin D deficient. 70%. Because nobody works and lives outside anymore. How many hours a day do you actually spend in the sun? Nobody does. Hardly anybody anyway. Most people are sunny, but we're inside and we're all screening ourselves from the sun. So we're mostly vitamin D deficient. So I would tell you, get your doctor to check your vitamin D level. Recommended, about 75 is where you want to shoot for, around 75. Curcumin, Indian spice, turmeric, binds amyloid and keeps it soluble so it can be pumped out of your brain. Has anti-inflammatory effects directly, reducing those inflammatory cytokines we talked about. Binds iron and copper to help get rid of it. This is all good stuff. It's also a free radical scavenger, decreasing oxidative stress. It does not have any benefit to people who already have dementia. You guys know why? Because we've already lost billions of neurons, and it's not going to cost billions of neurons to regrow. So this benefit is in prevention by reducing the inflammatory stress that would cause the insulin resistance that would cause the neuronal loss. But one other variable, it's only absorbed in conjunction with black pepper. So if you want to use it in your food to spice up your food, you can enjoy the flavors, but it will stay in the lumen and go out the other end. If you want it to absorb into your body, you have to take black pepper with it. Walnuts. Adults who regularly eat walnuts have better cognitive performance than those who don't. Walnut extract prevents amyloid from becoming in these fibrillate tangles, so it keeps it soluble. It will dissolve these plaques that build up. So I tell people, eat a handful of walnuts every day. I typically eat walnuts at least 4 times a week. Well, just a little handful, just a little handful. And I was so thankful because they gave me some walnuts to eat here this morning. So I was really happy to get that. Green tea is rich in antioxidants and flavonoids. It improves, now this is very interesting, it improves cognition and cognitive performance in all groups. Those with no cognitive impairments, those with mild cognitive impairments, and those already diagnosed with dementia. From whatever their baseline was, after the green tea, their performance improved. It is antioxidant, and it's been shown to clear this amyloid out of the brain. And the reason it's probably improving performance is because when they did functional studies, which is the communication pathways in the different regions of the brain, the green tea improved signaling from the different regions of the brain, then you had faster, rapid, more signaling in your brain regions after drinking green tea. Pomegranate juice is high in antioxidant polyphenols. It was an interesting study with animals. They had these cloned animals which were genetically altered to deposit high amounts of amyloid into the animals' brains. And this is to an animal model of Alzheimer's dementia. They randomized them to 2 groups, gave them the same diet, except the one group had the human equivalent of 8 ounces of pomegranate juice a day. The other group did not. They took brain biopsies at the beginning of the study to see how much amyloid was already in their brain. And then 12 weeks later, they did brain biopsies again to see if things had changed. Not surprisingly, the group without the pomegranate juice had more amyloid. They were genetically bred to have high amyloid. But the group with the pomegranate juice not only didn't have more, they actually had less amyloid than when they started. And so the pomegranate juice was clearing the amyloid out of the brain. Vanderbilt researchers showed that those who drank juice 3 times or more per week were 76% less likely to have Alzheimer's dementia than those who drank once a week or less. And the benefits were even more pronounced for those who have the bad high-risk genes. You have a family member, your mom, dad has Alzheimer's dementia. If you haven't had a genetic test, that family member is an indicator that you may have the higher risk of the ApoE4 genes. You can actually get gene tested to know for sure. But even if you have the ApoE4 gene, if you exercise regularly, have pomegranate juice, you're taking that risk away, doing the right lifestyle thing. So genes alone will not cause you to get this, and you can avoid it if you do the right lifestyle stuff. The benefit was from the polyphenols, not the various vitamins in the juice. So I recommend drink 8 ounces of pomegranate juice a day. When I'm at home, I have an 8-ounce glass every morning. What about coffee? Am I touching on religion here? Okay. So New England Journal of Medicine study of over 50,000 people followed for 13 years after adjusting for various other variables found that regular coffee consumption reduced all causes of mortality. Okay. Multiple studies show that coffee consumption reduces cardiovascular disease, stroke, cancers, diabetes type 2, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, all reduced with regular coffee consumption. The antioxidants that prevent, they also have antioxidants prevent the LDL building up and oxidizing in your arteries and amyloid from building up in your brain. Now, moderate daily coffee drinkers reduced Alzheimer's disease by 65%. Caffeinated coffee increases anti-inflammatory cytokines, and clears amyloid. Caffeinated coffee, the flavonoids with the caffeine working in conjunction were anti-inflammatory and was removing amyloid from the brain. Caffeinated coffee was beneficial in reducing Alzheimer's dementia. Decaf coffee was not. However, decaf coffee reduced all other causes of mortality. Diabetes type 2, cardiovascular disease, stroke, all those benefits were still seen with decaf coffee. But it didn't remove the amyloid unless you had the caffeine. This is important. Now, pay attention. Caffeine alone has no benefit. In fact, it's harmful. Caffeine alone is not, caffeine pills and caffeine in any other beverage other than green tea is harmful. It happens to be a unique combination of the caffeine with the flavonoids in the coffee bean that gives you the benefit. And in my book, it goes through the specific chemical cascades that are happening in very great detail with the scientific references if you want, and the books are free. Cautions, though, with coffee. You should really consider coffee more a medicinal. See, there's really no downside in eating a handful of walnuts. There's no downside in a glass of juice, okay? But there could be a downside in the caffeinated coffee. And that would be, first, let me talk about the sweeteners. Artificial sweeteners increase your risk of Alzheimer's dementia. Okay? So if you have a generally low sugar diet, you're not a high sugar diet, low sugar diet, and you have a couple cups of coffee every day with a teaspoon of sugar in your coffee, sugar. You do not increase your risk of Alzheimer's dementia if your diet is a low sugar diet. Okay, it's a high sugar diet, but not a little bit of sugar with your coffee on an otherwise low, it's no risk, okay? But if you have a low sugar diet and you have couple cups of coffee, even 1 cup of coffee a day with an equal or a saccharin or something like this in it, you increase your risk of Alzheimer's dementia. Okay? So you can, somebody's about to write a question, put in the box, you can avoid it. Okay? Stevia. Stevia in its natural form, the data would say, does not increase your risk and may actually be protective because it's got some flavonoid stuff in it. So natural stevia, but if it's highly processed and it comes in a white powder, then you may have problems. So you want to get it more of a natural form of the stevia. Okay? I happen to, when I'm home, I can't do this traveling, what I sweeten my coffee with is maple syrup. And at least one study shows that maple syrup also helps clear amyloid out of your brain and reduce your risk of dementia. So, but here's the risks and warnings. Caffeine lowers your threshold to have a seizure. So if you have a seizure disorder, epilepsy, and you take caffeine, you may lose seizure control. So people need to be careful if they have a seizure disorder and drinking coffee. Also, it can impair sleep for some people. And there's variables here. Not everybody is as sensitive to caffeine as other people. Some people are very sensitive, and they can have 1 cup in the morning and they can't sleep at night. Other people can drink caffeine and they can sleep fine. Different brains respond differently, okay? But let me tell you, sleep is more important than a cup of coffee. Okay? Don't drink a cup of coffee thinking you're going to reduce your Alzheimer's risk if it interferes with your sleep at night. You need to sleep. Does that make sense to everyone? And then if people have vascular disease, coronary artery disease, Raynaud's disease, it can be a vasoconstrictor and worsen those diseases. So you have to be careful with the coffee question. What about hormone replacement therapy? You know, this is estrogens for women after menopause. This is what we're talking about here. Have you been concerned about the conflicting data? Oh, it's helpful, harmful, helpful, harmful. Okay? What it seems to be, and I've got the research and the articles in the book, and the references are there if you want to look it up, is the timing of the initiation of the estrogen replacement therapy. If estrogen is started within 5 years of menopause, it reduces the risk of both heart disease and Alzheimer's dementia postmenopausally. A study of over 8,000 women followed for 20 years found that hormone replacement therapy decreased Alzheimer's dementia 40 to 50%. If it was started within 5 years. If it started after 5 years, their body has become settled into not having estrogen, and then reintroducing it causes a lot of problems. And that's where the data came in some of the estrogen studies. If you look at those, these studies included women who had been postmenopausally for more than 5 years. So, and that's where we're going to end. And it's time to take a break. Oh, look, I had 2 minutes. 2 minutes, look at that. Okay, so take a break. 15 minutes from now, we'll do our question and answers. You can turn those in. Thank you very much.